Welcome to another episode of The Disruptors, where we're arming you with the tools you need to innovate within the physical therapy space by highlighting those who have come before you. I'm your host, Stephen Cohen. Now, let's get into it. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Disruptors, where we're highlighting innovation within the rehab industry. Today, I am blessed to be joined by Dr. Kristin Nuckols, Doctor of Occupational Therapy and the Chief Clinical Officer and co-founder of Imago Rehab. Kristin, would you mind telling folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me today. So I've been an OT for close to 18 years, and I have been working with people who've had a stroke, brain injury, spinal cord injury, so what we call neurologic rehab for really the whole time. And I've been working for the last about 8 years on really innovation in this space and bringing something new to the market.
I love it. And so let's hop right into it. What is your why behind OT? What's driving you, or what drove you to get into OT?
So to get into OT, I had a hand injury. I was a big athlete. I was a gymnast, loved a lot of different sports, and I had just a little hand injury when I was in middle school, and I had to go to an OT, and she made a splint, and we did all these cool activities, and what do you know, I got better. And so that really pushed me into OT. I thought that'll work for me. And so really, since I was a middle schooler, this has been the field I'm interested in. I assumed I would do hand therapy, which is a portion of rehab. But as I went to OT school, I was exposed to this side of rehab that we call neurologic rehab. So, meeting people who've had a brain injury, meeting people who've had a stroke, and just there's this magic in neurologic rehab that really captivated me, because what you see today is not what you're going to see in the future. Something can change. And so that just drew me in. And so I've really been focusing on neurologic rehab my whole career.
I love that. Something can change. And as I don't know if we've talked about this, but if not, so my grandfather has been battling Parkinson's for about a decade now, and seeing the positive impact in terms of how that allowed him to maintain his independence for quite a while, but then unfortunately also the antithesis of that, which is when he got no PT or OT for a month when he was hospitalized for a blockage, and seeing how painfully impactful that was. I just want to say thank you to all the others that are family members, that are patients, like seeing that contrast, that almost perfect night and day experience for my grandfather. Like, you're doing something amazing, and I know I'm appreciative of it, and especially having I guess the vicarious experience that I do. It is incredibly valuable, and so for that, thank you on behalf of me, and I'm sure a few listeners as well. So you had your own injury that got you really interested in the OT. You thought you were going to do hand therapy, and had the aperture opened, right, to be able to see these other ways that you could impact the lives of people. And I have to imagine that is at least part of the why behind, if not all of it, to what you're doing now. But talk to me about how you started to make that transition from staff therapist into into Imago.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been a crazy journey. I spent the first 10 years of my career as you said, a staff therapist, working at a hospital, working at an outpatient clinic, largely, with the stroke population, other as well, but mostly stroke, and really working on during that time, being the best at my craft, wanting to understand, how do we do this? I've always loved reading research. I love that part of my undergrad and my master's degree. I was the student who was like, wait, have you seen this article? I love to read the results and read the methods. How do you do this? How do you make this work? Because therapy is an art and a science is kind of the phrasing that we use. But really, I want to know a lot of the science of it. I want to know what is going to make people get better. And that can be really nebulous in the neurologic population. So, to get back to the question, which was, um,
Actually, do you mind if we stay on that for a second?
yeah.
So, the goal of this podcast is to be able to make innovation feel more accessible, right? So, I actually want to stay on how did you make time to read research, right? I would imagine you had a full caseload, potentially, heaven forbid, had a personal life, right? Like, how did you make time, or how did you create that prioritization to stay current on research?
That is a great question. And I can plug my former employers who I still love. The first place I worked was Sheltering Arms, which is now the Sheltering Arms Institute, which is in Richmond, Virginia. And they had a culture for understanding literature. So that was not just show up and we're going to give you as many patients as possible. It was, we're going to be the best at what we do. And we're going to translate clinical science into the day-to-day treatment. So that is very unusual. That was on purpose. I chose a place that was mission driven and that I believed in. So part of, they have things like, I don't know what they do now because I'm not working there anymore, but having opportunities like a monthly journal club where someone, people bring snacks and over lunch, someone brings a plate of brownies and everybody learns about a research article, right? So you can make it part of your culture, which not only do you learn something, but also you make research less scary. That's part of it, right? So, I'm guilty of looking at a research article, and a lot of the research I read comes out of engineering journals, because I'll get into that a little bit. But I'm a little guilty of getting to the methods and going, yada, 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 Python scripts. Okay, where's the result? What happened? But at least being able to understand, you see a new device or you learn about a new treatment technique. You really need to be able to understand, how does this apply to me? Does this apply to the patients I see? Are these patients 30 days post-stroke? Are these patients 7 years post-stroke? Does everything apply to everything else? I mean, that's the idea here that that really makes me love research, is you want to understand what do you think is going to happen? It doesn't mean because this result happened in some cohort with some intervention, it's going to happen for your patient that you see Tuesday, Thursday for a month. Is it the same? Or would they fit in that study? Did you give them the same intervention? Was it recreatable? Did you do the same thing? Like that's where I get into the, what is it that we're trying to do with patients? And that's really what put me on my journey. So I spent 10 years in the clinic, hospital, and outpatient, and learned how to use a lot of different technology. I love to use robotics. I love to use electrical stim. I love to use gaming. I like to use all the things that are new and interesting because it keeps people engaged in their therapy. And that's number one. If they're bored, what's the point? And so I had the opportunity to then work in a Harvard engineering lab, which is a massive right turn, and I think I said no a few times because I was just like, what would I do? How would I help them? But then once I took a leap and joined that research team and got to work on, designing and testing wearable soft robots and the concept of telehealth and, all these different things, then I was able to create something new, which is a startup called Imago Rehab. And we're a 7-state telehealth practice. We combine this work from this Harvard engineering lab, which is about understanding what people do at home, and also my doctorate that I did in OT. So that's a lot. Maybe we pause and see what you want to tease out.
There's one thing I definitely want to tease out. One of the things that I heard there was a great tip that I want to highlight is you put yourself in a position to succeed, right? And so by finding a culture that you fit into and you knew would help make you a better clinician, like that seems to have created a really nice foundation for you to be able to launch from there. Because I'd imagine that you being on top of your game in terms of reading research and knowing how to interpret findings and methods and everything else allowed you to progress much quicker in that Harvard opportunity than if you didn't have that prior experience, right? And yes. I love how you also like it was part of the culture. You chose that, and then it's not all on you either, right? It's a
Right.
rising tide raises all boats. And so I think
I use that
that
phrase all the time.
yes, it's a great
I
phrase.
believe
It's a great
I believe
phrase.
in that. I don't want to, poo-poo on other places that you can work, but the places I've worked, I have selected very carefully because I wanted to be surrounded by a culture of excellence, not driven by, how many possible billing units can I get in a day. That's not why I'm a therapist. So
I can appreciate that. And so yeah, I think that's first. We're less than 10 minutes in, and we already have a really good tip in putting yourself in a position to succeed, and surrounding yourself with folks that can buoy you, right? And so it doesn't have to be all you forging the new path. I think there's a misconception there, right? That it always has to be you, and that's just simply not the case.
agreed.
So we're on a great track. So you're in this Harvard engineering lab. You said no a couple times. Like walk me through that a little bit. I would like to double click in there.
Sure. I mean, I think there now I have learned my value, which is something you and I were just chatting about before we got started with recording. I know my value now, but I don't think that I really did before. And so I don't know everything about everything, but I know a lot about occupational therapy, right? I know a lot about stroke rehab. I know a lot about neurologic rehab. I know a lot about translating clinical science into practice. That's my bag. But I think that I underestimated myself when the professor said, I think you should join our team and help our engineers design robots. I was just intimidated by the name Harvard and by engineers, right? Because I do not have a math brain. I that's not my skill set. So, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be my skill set because that's not what they were hiring me for. They were hiring me for voice of customer, for experience of clinician, for being the user of a technology, not for coding the robot itself. They don't want me to do that. I would have been really bad at that. So that's, I said no because I didn't understand what exactly I would do. And also I was the first occupational therapist that they hired probably ever at Harvard in general, right? Like that's, they don't have OT school and they don't have OTs that do jobs for them. So I was probably the first OT they ever hired. And so there wasn't a job description. There wasn't a clear path, and I had always, in my 10 years of clinical care, I would show up at 8. I'd treat a patient at 8, at 9, at 10, at 11, I'd have lunch. I'd 1, 2, 3, write my notes and go home. And that was just every day. Right. So to begin this job that's more project based, I would, I had no idea what to do. And that's maybe something we want to dig into a little bit, that there was no path that was already pre-written for me to follow. So I really had to figure out what was it, how do I translate my knowledge and what I can bring to a project when no one has done it before,
Well, it sounds like, and advice I give pretty consistently that was given to me is only change one thing, right? As you're making these career shifts, if possible, which it sounds like you did, right? So your environment was different in
Yes.
that you had to change the way that you thought about delivering care, right? But your technical expertise
The
as a
knowledge, the
clinician,
base.
all of that was directly not only portable, which portable to me would give the illusion that it was, even like you were bringing in something that was completely missing, right, from the team. And I think we've all seen what happens when tech giants get into a room and build something, right, and leave the clinicians out, right? You can see in the graveyard of health tech, the Googles, the Amazons, the Walmarts of the world that, like, oh, well, we'll just do clinical stuff, like, and it'll be fine, and the tech will be so good it'll make up for everything else, and it's just simply not reality, right? And I even see other health tech startups, and I see the leadership team, and I'm like, where's your providers? like,
often don't exist. That's something that's really different about our team. It was founded by a clinician. So we are, we're a clinician for everything we do is to support our patient care.
and I think that's so valuable, right? So I think to even put a further stamp on the put yourself in a position to succeed, I think for others that are considering going into non-direct clinical care opportunities, right, is looking for that clinician on the leadership team. And if it doesn't exist, hopefully you're it, or that needs to be a huge consideration, right? I think for our C-suite, it is a DPT, an MPT, and then myself and a master's in computer science. So it's evenly split between clinician and non-clinician, which I think is not. I know is a differentiator for how we come to market, because the workflow considerations in particular, right? That knowledge is so valuable, right? And to knowing your value, I would imagine you had multiple instances, and maybe if you could think of one, that'd be great. But I'd imagine you had multiple instances where you looked at something and were like, "Oh no, you can't do that because this thing happened."
Day one.
Okay. Day one. Okay. Do you remember? Because I'd love to learn about it.
Yeah, sure. So when I joined this Harvard team, they were working on 2 robots for the upper limb. Very, pretty early stage. They'd written like one paper on each. So they had tested with some people to see, what does this robot do? What can we do with it? So one of them was the glove device. That one was further along when I joined that team, and it is now kind of what our team that started Imago Rehab brought that technology with us. So there was another device that's still at Harvard now, which is more of a robotic shirt. It's one way to think about it. So when you put on this shirt, it has some chambers that will help you lift your arm up. But you can wear it around. So it's like clothing that helps you move. So, but one of the first days I was there, they had a participant, actually a young lady with spinal cord injury, wearing this shirt, and it's lifting up her arm, and everyone's just sort of inspecting it visually. And I was like, are we measuring the angle of her shoulder? Are we measuring how high can she lift her arm, with how much speed, with how much force? Like, can she do a task she couldn't do without the shirt? And they were all like, oh, we were just seeing if we could, inflate it. We could just put, and these are really smart people. They made clothing lift an arm up. Crazy, right? That's very crazy. But what about the user experience? How does she feel in it? So there's just like, my initial instinct was, hey, what's the patient's experience here? Is this clinically relevant? Does this tell us anything? Does it make her function better? Like, how would we do that? So then, that's what I brought to the team was, I know how to assess patient function. So I, selected assessments that would show if something was different or not, and then did all the communication with the patients. They're participants, really, not patients for us, but, bringing people in, talking to them, consenting them, kind of doing that human experience, which is, again, like you mentioned, what I would do in a clinic. I would onboard them to the clinic. I would assess their function. The difference here was the therapeutic intervention was, hey, you want to try on this robot shirt, as opposed to let me lead you through exercises or something like that.
How was it instantaneous when you joined and you were able to have the confidence to express those questions and opinions, or was that a gradual process that took a little bit of getting comfortable with?
I'm not a shy person, so for me it was like, you need me. I could see where the gaps were, and we did this for each other, right? So the teams of engineers and myself, and there were designers and fabric, apparel designers and electrical engineers, and just this whole team. Everybody has their part, but we really had to learn to speak the same language. This, that's important to you as someone who's working with, like you said, computer science, PT, business, you all have to speak the same language. And that's, I would give lectures maybe once a month on anatomy. I'm like, we're working on a robot shirt. Do you know how a shoulder functions? Do you know what happens when it doesn't function? Do you know what muscles we're talking about? What are the positions we're talking about? So I I'm a person who just asks. I'm usually like an ask for forgiveness person, not ask for permission. So I think that goes with entrepreneurship. You're like, well, this is what I'm going to do, and if someone doesn't want me to do it, I suppose they can tell me. Yeah. I recognized where my clinical skills were one of the things that was missing. It was missing in how a device was being designed, so I didn't wait for people to ask me those things. I just provided that information in a friendly way, and hey, over lunch, I'd like to give a lecture on, how the shoulder works, how the hand works. These are things you don't know. And then you guys can teach me about, Raspberry Pi, which is not a dessert. It's a controller, so we both had to learn things about how we're going to have this working relationship.
Thank you for listening to this episode. This would not be possible without the sponsorship of Sarah Health. Sarah is the relationship operating system for physical therapy practices, driving better patient outcomes, improved arrival rate, and improved financial margins. If you'd like to learn more, check them out at sarahealth.com, sarahealth.com. And if you'd be interested in advertising with us and helping us produce even more great stories, please let us know at steven@sarahealth.com. Now, back to the episode. I'm so glad that you're giving these very tactical, very discrete examples, because I mean, and as someone who grew up in the Midwest and startups, like a tech startup is for other people, and going to UCLA for me is for other people, right? I think there's a lot of people, but especially the more and more I work with therapists, like there's such a tendency to downplay the amazing knowledge that you've built, not only like across a few different dimensions, right? And you've already described a few. You described the clinical knowledge, right? The basic anatomy and advanced anatomy, the clinical experience, right? Of how a clinician is going to interact and a patient is going to interact with something. And like that is so valuable, or else you have a bunch of tech folks sitting in a room and be like, wow, that's so cool that we just did this. Like, but who's going to use it? Yeah.
But what's next? And I went to state school. I didn't go to a fancy university. I love my university, but shout out to JMU. So I went to state school. I did my master's right then. I, was an A-B student. I was not a phenomenal academic. I actually had a conversation not that long ago with the gentleman who was our program director when I was there. And I said, did you ever expect me to get a doctorate? And he said, honestly, no. I'm not the most academic person, but I have a major passion. And I found that when I did my doctorate, boy, it was, I'm going to say easy, because I loved it, because I wanted to know everything there was to know about my topic. So that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to be the most academic. You don't have to be, type A. I'm not type A. Everyone that knows me will tell you that. So you don't have to be that most organized, most everything put together. No, you just have to know a lot about something and really care to bring it to more people.
I like that. It makes me think of the quote of hard work beats talent when talent won't work hard, right? And you letting your passion be the fuel, it fueled you to work harder and smarter than others, and to put yourself in this position. I really like also, you got to get your hand slapped every once in a while. That was actually one of my mentors when I was at Deloitte Consulting. He consistently said that. Like, if you're not getting your hand slapped every once in a while, you're not trying hard enough. And I think that is proven to be correct, not only in the corporate world, but also in the startup world, where, if you're not creating data through interactions, right? And data is not just numbers in an Excel sheet, right? It's conversations like this. It's conversations with patients. It's asking questions, especially the tough ones, like, why would you not wear this shirt? It's like, oh, well, because of X, Y, Z. Oh, well, we could fix all three of those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. How will you know if you don't ask?
Yep.
Yeah. I heard
You won't.
you're reminding me also of a quote about imposter syndrome that I read recently that said, if you're not experiencing imposter syndrome, you're probably not putting yourself out there enough.
I like that. I like that.
So
That would, there's a book.
I feel that way sometimes, but usually just means I'm really challenging myself and I'm, not saying no to any opportunity that comes to me.
That I like that. I like that a lot, and couldn't agree more. There's a book I'm reading right now called Arete by Brian Johnson, and it goes into that in a lot of detail. And I would suggest that to anybody. It's so fantastic. So sorry, we'll come back. So you're working in this lab, and this glove device, like, oh, there's a lot of opportunity for this in the real world, right? So walk me through the process. I'd imagine there's tech transfer involved, if I had to guess. The process that you went through to bring that into patients' homes, like where it is today. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about that journey.
Sure. So at that same time, I was also doing my doctorate in OT. So when you do a post-professional OTD, you can either get an entry-level OTD or you can get a post-professional. So I already had a master's, so I could just do an online OTD. And so you go in with an idea for a thesis, and then over about, a year and a half, 2 years, you shape that idea that you had, that thing you want to learn more about, into something that is tangible and usable. So you have to create either a program that you could implement, or a grant that you could write, or something that you've learned, just everything there is to know about that topic, and you're identifying a need and what you're going to do about it. So I did that, and my need was stroke rehab just does not work the way that we think it should work. People don't get better enough. The in-person, the idea that, like, you need to come to me and I'm going to do stuff to you with my hands, and then you're going to go home and then you're going to be better. That is not working. So there's a lot of research that says if you do X, Y, and Z, people will have this result. Usually when we compare that to traditional care, you don't see a lot of change, and then you see some kind of change with a better plan. Yep. But traditional care is just like everybody does what they are trained to do, and there's no protocol and there's no specifics, and it's just like whatever you feel like doing with the patient that day. Boy, it is really dependent on a therapist being like, we are going to do a lot of reps. We are going to be intense. It's going to be interesting. You're going to do it at home too. You're going to carry it like that just doesn't happen because therapists are there's not the structure for that usually.
Yep.
And I don't know, what if the therapist is tired that day? Like, what if they're kind of burned out, right? So there's just not the structure to make that usual care. That should be usual care, but it's not. So that was really my problem that I wanted to fix. And I heard that from patients over 10 years who would say, I can do this when I'm with you, but when I'm at home, I can't do it. I don't know where to do it. I don't know how to do it. I don't know what stuff to use. And so pre-COVID, my solution was about using a telehealth platform to do post-stroke care. So I say pre-COVID because, gosh darn it, it was an idea that I really wanted to implement before COVID happened. And there's a lot of, when COVID happened, people just went, oh, everything we do, we can do virtually. But that is really not true. You have to have a program that is intentionally virtual.
Yep.
For it to be successful. So that's what we're doing now. I exited the lab. We had some, startup funding. I launched in Massachusetts only. I treated the patients myself, who could self-pay for my services. And now, 2.5 years later, we are open in 7 states and billing 22 payers for our services with a team of therapists using the protocol that I wrote. And patients get better in ways that we've never seen before.
Do you get chills when you say that? Because I'm getting like goosebumps. Like that is so cool. That is so cool.
It's so
Like,
cool. And really, I mean, I say this all the time. It was theoretical, but it was really well researched and the problem was really well understood so that the intervention fits the problem and it works. So
there,
it's not a random accident that this telehealth program works. And it's not to say that every telehealth program is going to work. It's very specific. It's very nuanced, and it fits the problem that we have, which is patients have a really hard time figuring out what to do at home, how to do it, where to do it, how often to do it, what to do when they run into a problem. That's what our program does. We help them solve those problems in real time and then when we're not there.
there's a couple things there that I wanted to hit on. One is the intense focus that you had or have. Sorry, it's not past tense. Because I think people get into this. Oh, I need to be able to be everything to everybody, and I really like how you've laid out. Like you saw a gap between where patients were ending up and where you thought they could be because there was a delivery problem, right? And so I like Alex Hormozy. I know he has some detractors as well, but I really like it. One of his things is about niche slapping people. It's like, no, get really niche, especially to start, and then you can add on from there.
Yes.
And so I love how you had this. Okay, we're going to help stroke patients. We're going to be virtual first. Like you just start ticking away. Like, okay, this is our bullseye, and we're not getting away from this. And that was 2.5 years is no time at all. So from 2.5 years to do that, to go from, hey, I'm treating in this virtual first environment, and now you're in 7 states with 22 different payers, starting with self-pay to go to that, like that. Yeah. I think that fast. It's so fast. It's so fast. It's so amazing. And what a great example, like this microcosm of start really, really niche and be absurdly good at it.
Good at that thing. We're both doing this because that's how it looks. And that's, that was recommended from our advisors and our investors as well, because as a therapist, and I tell them this a lot, as a therapist, if I worked at the clinic down the street, I would treat everybody that came in. I might have one patient with stroke and somebody with Parkinson's and somebody with a wrist fracture and somebody with generalized weakness that we don't know why they're having a hard time and blah, blah. It would just be really open and random. And maybe that's one reason why people, maybe don't get the results they want, is because we have to be generalists and specialists all at the same time. And that's really hard. So it's almost like the therapists are saying to me, we can treat more stuff than just stroke. We can do this with stroke. We can also do it with brain injury. We can do it with Parkinson's. We can do it. We can expand and expand, and we want to get there. But like you said, we have to start by showing our skill and our ability in a niche, and then we can expand that.
Yeah, because there's going to be complications just moving states, adding there's going to be complications there complexity to have to solve for. And so, just changing one thing, right? Like, okay, we're going to still do this one thing, but now we're going to do Massachusetts and New York. Okay, perfect.
Exactly.
Okay, well, now we got to take Blue Cross Blue Shield Empire.
Yeah. Yeah. What's different between the two state practice acts? What is different in licensure? What's different, geographically, culturally? Like these are things we have to know so that we can expand state by state. That's a great point about not being everything. That is really number one in startups, is that I am not scalable. So everything that I need to do, or everything that everyone on our team needs to do, it has to be documented and trainable, which makes things take a long time sometimes. That feels really frustrating sometimes, because I'm like, oh, I've got this great idea. I want to change, however we do such and such task. But I can't just do it once. I have to document it in our training and then train everybody and then make sure that's the training going forward. So sometimes that feels, I want to just make a change and keep going, but every change has to be scalable and put into a system. So the day that we hired our first intake team member was the best day of my life. Because the intake department was this.
Yep.
Every call, every email, every referral came to me for the first year and a half, 2 years. So passing
you
that
not
to
being
a
scalable
state was great.
Oh yeah, you not being scalable, that I feel that. Like, I have a physiological response to that statement. And you're 100% right on documentation, because you have a series of lived experiences, both personally and professionally, that have led you to this moment, right? And it's easy to forget about those things. Like, oh, well, why don't you just know that? It's like, well,
Yeah.
like, Steven, not everyone worked in the oil fields when they're in high school. Like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense, right? And I'm sure you have those type of experiences in your past that make some things easy and some things harder. This Krista, this has been fantastic. I want to flip to my favorite question to ask, which is, if you had a magic wand and could fix one thing within rehab, what would it be?
There's a lot of things to fix, which is why you asked this question. But I think this answer is going to speak to my more of my mission as a therapist and less of my experience as an entrepreneur and business person now. But I wish rehab were free. No one asked to have a stroke. No one meant to get in a car crash and have a brain injury. The stress of having a financial burden be tied maybe to your dosage of therapy is really dark. So if I could make rehab free, where people didn't have to worry about their finances, allowing them to get the rehab that they need, I would fix that.
I'm going to say that you are making that a reality. Now, granted, that's going to take time too, but the way that you do that, right? And we've had this experience in the remote therapeutic monitoring world, right? Where now we're building the outcomes and the studies and doing our own data collection to be able to say, hey, commercial payers, you actually save money if you do this. And so if we can at least make our piece free, right, to the patient, then I think we've done our job. Now, we are a long way away from that. There's still a lot more work that we need to do. And thank goodness, or else I wouldn't have anything to do. And I don't know, bored Steven probably isn't something this world is ready for. And definitely my wife isn't. So, let's just not have that happen. But you're on that path, because as you show the better outcomes, then it's, well, hey, long-term care insurance, or whoever it is, right? Like, I can keep your member in independent living for 5 more years, or whatever it is, right? As you come up with that data, holy cow, that's going to be easy. It's like, you're what, like a couple grand, like, done, right? You start making that really easy. So I appreciate that as your magic wand, but I also want to commend you on it not being something you're tossing over the other side of the wall, and that you're doing something about it. I think that's truly amazing.
Yeah, I think that's how we describe what we do, is we make rehab accessible to people, so they don't, I don't want to go too far, but just, the way we see rehab is that it's geographically isolated and it's hard to get to and it's expensive. So we're trying to make a change there by making it accessible and making people really understand what they can be doing when they're at their house. So thank you.
Thank you. Right. I hope not to have to use your services. Right. But if I do, I'm calling you, or your intake person that you
call me. Or people. Yeah. The intake team.
I'll call the intake team. I will follow the standard operating procedure. I will be a good patient, or a decently good one. Kristin, thank you. This has been a fantastic interview, and I appreciate you spending time with us. I think there's a couple of really, really good tidbits that I want to highlight as we come to a close. So one is putting yourself in a position to succeed, right? So you did that early on. You found the culture that you fit in well and was going to push you to be excellent, to be world class, and in a specific area, right? And so what that your early employers were to you could be different employers to somebody else, right? But finding that culture that you're going to be able to elevate yourself and not against the grain, right? I think finding that is extremely important, and then following your passion and allowing that to fuel the tougher days, right? Because you're going to have them. You're going to have down days. In the startup world, every day is a roller coaster, right? It just depends on if an up and down is within the same day or hour or minute. Yeah, hour. Yeah. Sometimes even smaller cadence than that. But following your passion allows you to break through those tougher days. And so those are really, really good tips for folks. And how can people learn more about Imago? How can they learn more about you? Where can people find you?
Sure. So our website is imagorehab.com. Imago is IMAGO. It's a phase of metamorphosis. It's not random. It's actually, to get really specific, it's the phase of metamorphosis when the creature emerges as something new. So let that cook for a little bit. So imagorehab.com is our business website. Feel free to look at that. You can find me on LinkedIn, Kristin Nuckols. Connect with me, have a conversation.
And people should. We've had multiple interactions, you and I have, and I've been continuously impressed. And I gotta admit, I do love your magic wand. I think the reason I like it so much is that it's not just something you're waving, but you're going out and making happen. And I think that's something to be admired. And I know I definitely have respect and admiration for what you all do. So with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Disruptors. I hope that you were able to take one or two things away that you can apply immediately to your own innovation journey. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Cohen. This is sponsored by Sarah Health. Let's keep moving.